Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call to order the Board of Adjustment regular meeting of June 1st, 2023 at 4:10 p.m. My name is Jack Farrell, and I'll be sitting in as the chair of this meeting. We have present three primary members of the Board of Adjustment, and we'll get to that in a second. The important point is that every single member of the Planning and Zoning Board, when appointed to the village, by the Village Council, is simultaneously appointed to both the Board of Adjustment and the Planning and Zoning Board. And therefore, any one of the members of the Planning and Zoning Board can come forward and serve as an alternate during any particular requirement during a Board of Adjustment meeting. So with that being said, I wanted to go through an organizational item. The first item of organization, since we only have three members of the Board of Adjustment, the primary members, at the table at this point in time, I'd like to consider and would entertain a motion by the board to appoint additional primary members if they would so desire.
I will move to appoint Matt Jones and Paul Roberts as primary members of the Board of Adjustment.
Second.
We have a motion by Jeremy and a second by Ms. Latham to appoint Matt Jones and Paul Roberts as primary members of the Board of Adjustment. Is there any discussion on that? No discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? They're hearing none. Congratulations. We have two new primary members of the Board of Adjustment, Paul Roberts and Matt Jones. So we're full up to speed here now, and the alternates may be excused if they wish to be. If they prefer to stay in the room and watch the proceedings, that'd be fine. Appreciate it.
I do have a question.
Say that again?
I have a question.
Yes.
With my rolling off the board, have you thought who is going to take my seat?
That's an issue for a month and a
Another
half from now.
day? For another day?
For another day.
Okay,
right.
thank
It's a
you.
good question. Appreciate it.
Throw it out there.
I will remind you that we are live streamed each meeting.
Right, thank you.
So what Jeremy was getting at is anyone out there who's watching, who is interested and would like to serve as an ETJ representative for the board, because the way the statutes do read, we do need an ETJ representative who will sit as part of the Board of Adjustment and act on any matters, especially those that are within the extraterritorial zoning jurisdiction.
Yeah, excellent point. The legislative requirements are that if we have an ETJ, we must have representation on the ETJ, and the ETJ representation is represented on both the Planning and Zoning Board and the Board of Adjustment. So anyone who wants to come forward in the ETJ to indicate an interest in that, we're more than welcome to hear them, and you would be missed.
That might be grounds for granting an extension to somebody's term to continue serving
You're
longer,
allowed to continue, by the way. just
in the
wanted to make
absence
sure
of
that's
other
possible.
applicants.
And
Let's not rule that out.
that is very accurate in case for whatever situation that we cannot get someone.
Good to know.
All right, the next order of business is approval of the minutes from the January 5th, 2023 regular meeting of the Board of Adjustment. I assume that everyone's looked at those minutes, and are there any additions, corrections, comments on those minutes? If none, I'll entertain a motion.
I move to approve the minutes of the January 5th, 2023 BOA regular meeting as written.
Have a second?
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Hooper and a second by Mr. Jones to approve the minutes of the January 5th, 2023 regular meeting. Any discussion on those? Hearing none, I'll ask for a vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries, so therefore the meeting's minutes are approved. We're now at the point where we are close to entering the public hearing, and I just wanted to give some kind of broad outline as to how this goes. In general, this is an evidentiary hearing, which means that we only can consider and would consider facts in evidence that are given in evidence for this particular variance. That being said, I will be swearing in anyone who wants to provide testimony, both staff and the applicant and any others who may wish to provide some testimony. It's also important to remember that any testimony should be factual. It's not opinion, although opinions are important, they're not a factor in our decision. So we'd like to make, the decision will be totally based upon the facts and evidence as presented. The steps are we will have the staff present the facts and around this case. The applicant then present their situation and inform us of the situation. And then any others who wish to provide some more testimony can do so at that time. After that, then the board will consider all the facts and evidence and make a decision hopefully today. So that's the broad outline of where we're going to go on with that. With that being said, I'd like to entertain a motion to recess the regular meeting and enter into the public hearing.
I'll make a motion to recess the regular meeting and enter into the public hearing.
Second? We have a motion by Jeremy and a second by, was that Matt? On entering into the public hearing. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So we have entered into the regular meeting. The first step then, of course, will be to hear from the staff as to the outline of the case and enter any information. Before that, I need to, and who in the staff is going to provide testimony?
I will be.
Ms. Carpenter. I'm going to give you the oath, please. Do you affirm, please stand and raise your right hand. Will you affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you.
One point of order, Jack, if I could, before Maria gets into the presentation. It would be prudent if we wanted to disclose any site visits, opportunities for.
I'm sorry. Good point. Yeah, it's important that the board enter a decision that is unbiased in any way, shape, or form. Therefore, I would ask that any members of the board who have any considerations that they'd like to consider, that we should consider relative to any bias, ex parte communication, or other thoughts about this, in other words, having, for example, a predefined conclusion. If there's any board members who would like to discuss that.
Jack, I would like to disclose that I know Derek Simmons. I've known him for approximately 6 or 7 years. In my past career, I did service in a capacity to his business where I did sell some building products to Derek. In today's world, there is no relationship, any sort of business relationship. I do not participate financially in any outcome of the decision today or the house that he is in. I did make a site visit, I'm impartial. I'm able to make a decision. I will disclose as well, just for the sake that our children do go to the same school and they're in the same grade, just to be a little further in that. However, in the decision that needs to be made today, I'm able to be impartial to both sides and make the correct decision.
Any comments on this from the board? No? No issues, no considerations?
I did also visit the site.
And I also visited the site last weekend and spoke to no one, but just observed,
Drove by.
drove by. All right, so we're okay then? I'm fine with that. Great, thank you. All right, so Maria, you've already been sworn in. What can you tell us about this situation?
All right. Purpose of this public hearing is to receive testimony for a variance request from section 9.13, fences, walls, and columns, as it relates to a retaining wall at the property addressed as 185 Cantor Lane. This property is further identified by Moore County parcel ID number 000-18577. The property is located within the R10 High Density Residential Zoning District. Specifically, the applicant, Discover Homes LLC, is requesting the variance to allow for a retaining wall over 3.5 feet in height in the front yard setback. So just a little bit of how the evidentiary hearing process works. Requests for variances are quasi-judicial decisions which require an evidentiary hearing. These decisions are quasi-judicial due to the fact that judgment and discretion is used in applying the standards for review. The purpose of evidentiary hearings is to gather competent, relevant, and factual evidence on the application, not solicit broad public opinion. All who participate must be sworn in to provide factual testimony and relevant evidence only, and limit repetitious testimony. Staff acts as the initial witness by presenting basic information and background on the request and enters staff exhibits into the record. The applicant and other witnesses will be sworn in and are able to provide factual testimony on the application to the board. Board members, you get to listen, ask relevant questions, assess the credibility of all testimony, remain impartial, and vote on the case. And at the conclusion of the hearing, the board shall make its decision based on the evidence submitted and testimony given while adopting findings of facts on all the standards. So this public hearing was noticed in accordance with the PDO and North Carolina general statutes. And you can see outlined in blue, there, the subject parcel, 185 Cantor Lane, and then the surrounding parcels that are outlined in the pink are the ones that were notified. So the request today is to vary section 9.13 F2 of the Pinehurst Development Ordinance, which states that retaining walls located in the front yard setback shall not exceed 3.5 feet in height. Specifically, this request is to allow a cement retaining wall exceeding 3.5 feet in height to encroach 17.74 feet into the required 30-foot minimum front setback for the R10 zoning district. The retaining wall is currently 12.26 feet from the front property line, abutting Cantor Lane. The applicant intends the final height of the wall to range from approximately 9.25 feet to less than 1 foot. So here you can see a site plan, a survey done, and here next to the red line is where the retaining wall will be located, coming off the front corner of the house. Some background, the subject property, which is lot 293, was created as part of Phase 1, Unit 8 subdivision for Pinehurst Incorporated in October of 1972. The subject property is approximately 15,317 square feet in area, or 0.36 acres, which exceeds the minimum lot size requirement of 10,000 square feet in the R10 zoning district. Records from the Moore County Tax Department and the Register of Deeds indicate that the property was purchased by the applicant in May of 2021. The adjacent properties, which were also created as part of the original subdivision, are also zoned as R10 and are vacant or contain single-family dwellings that were built between 1990 to most recently in 2020. So here you can see the original subdivision as it was platted, and right down here is lot 293, our subject lot. Prior to construction, the vacant lot had approximately 20 feet of elevation change, decreasing in height from the front of the lot abutting Cantor Lane to the rear. Physical conditions of the property include a blue line stream located within the 25-foot rear setback and a wetlands boundary delineation within the building envelope. The current PDO regulations require a 30-foot undisturbed buffer along streams, wetlands, and water bodies for all development other than development of existing single-family lots. The subject property was platted in 1972 prior to the municipal incorporation of the village of Pinehurst in 1980 and subsequent adoption of zoning and subdivision regulations. Therefore, the subject property is not required to maintain that 30-foot wetlands buffer and has no additional restraints for single-family development. The most recent survey does not show structures located within the wetlands boundary delineation. So here is a elevation. You can see how the elevation changed from the front property line 20 feet back to the rear of the property. So it's a pretty steep drop back there. And here you can see the blue line stream and the wetlands delineation. And you can know, although the applicant was able to build within that wetlands area on his building envelope, he chose to keep the building out of that. Because the application for the retaining wall was submitted prior to the amendment of the retaining wall ordinance, August 2022 instead of March 2023, but before a final permit decision was made, the applicant can choose which version of the ordinance applies. This is a legal concept known as permit of choice, which is pursuant to the North Carolina General Statutes 160D-108. Staff made the applicant aware that the amended ordinance may be more favorable as it allows a retaining wall no taller than 3.5 feet in the front yard setback, and that was previously limited to 3 feet. So here's just a little timeline of how things happened. January 24th of 2022, after review, the planning and inspection staff issued a permit for a new single-family home. July 2022, during a rough-in inspection, a village building inspector observed the retaining wall and would let them know that they would require an engineer's letter on the footings and engineered design for the walls, in addition to the zoning permit. July 27th, 22, the planning and inspection staff met with the applicant to discuss the retaining wall ordinance and permit requirements and a variance request. July 29th, the applicant provided a foundation survey which showed the retaining wall encroaching the front yard setback. In August of 22, a retaining wall permit application was submitted by the applicant. A village building inspector requested an engineer's stamp design for the retaining walls. And then in March of 2023, Village Council approved ordinance 23-09, amending section 9.13 of the PDO that regulates retaining walls. In April, the applicant provided an engineering report and stamped design plans for the retaining wall. May 1st, a variance request was submitted by the applicant, and then on May 10th, the retaining wall passed a footing inspection by a village building inspector. So here you can see the retaining wall as it stands right now. And then here we have a rendering of what it'll look like after the fill has been added and landscaping. So standards of review. The Board of Adjustment shall not grant a variance unless and until it makes the following findings. There has to be an unnecessary hardship that would result from the strict application of the ordinance. It shall not be necessary to demonstrate that in the absence of the variance, no reasonable use can be made of the property. The hardship results from conditions that are peculiar to the property, such as location, size, or topography. So hardships resulting from personal circumstances, as well as hardships resulting from conditions that are common to the neighborhood or the general public, may not be the basis for granting a variance. 3, the hardship did not result from actions taken by the applicant or the property owner. So the act of purchasing the property with knowledge that circumstances exist that may justify the granting of a variance shall not be regarded as self-created hardship. And 4, the requested variance is consistent with the spirit, purpose, and intent of the ordinance, such that public safety is secured and substantial justice is achieved. So here are some options that you can do after the public hearing. You have the authority to subpoena witnesses and may request additional information. The board can continue the public hearing on the requested variance. The board can grant the requested variance. You can grant the requested variance with conditions. In granting any variance, the Board of Adjustment may attach appropriate conditions, provided that the conditions are reasonably related to the request, or you can deny the requested variance. Any decision to grant or deny the request shall be accompanied by findings of fact stating the reasons why the request meets or does not meet each of the standards of review. And any granting of variance request requires a concurring vote of 4 out of 5. So at this time, I'd like to submit into the record the staff report with attachments and exhibits, this presentation, the application, and the applicant's materials and exhibits.
Great. Thank you very much, Maria. Are there any questions for Maria as far as clarification or expanding on a point from the board?
Maria, you pointed out the wetlands on a previous slide there. I think it did not go straight across. It kind of was jagged in a sense. So just for clarity, I think you made this point, but construction of the home can go into the wetlands. Is that correct? Okay. So the home itself, so the envelope that we're looking at here, the 15,000 square feet, the home could have entered into the wetlands.
Right, well, the 15,000 square feet is the whole lot.
Right.
The dotted line is your building envelope. So the house could have been anywhere in there because when it was platted, you were allowed to build in the wetlands. So, but he chose to keep it out of there.
Wanted to make sure that I was clear on that. Okay, thanks.
Additional questions, comments, clarification?
I guess maybe the comment, maybe a question, I don't know. This kind of reminds me of the one that we did. It was at number 6 with the wall. It was brought to us kind of after the fact.
Right.
I mean, I think we're in the same situation, aren't we? I mean, similar?
Well, it's a retaining wall in the setback,
And it's already complete.
but each situation, of course, is evaluated separately.
Yeah, okay.
Hold on, Stick. If you'd like to provide testimony or add comments, you can do so later on. Thank you. Didn't mean to shut you down, but
A question on the timeline. It didn't seem like there was a point in there where, and maybe there's another data point in the timeline of, okay, it was recognized that a retaining wall was built, but was a retaining wall in the front setback a part of the original application package?
So I don't think so. I think it was discovered when the building inspector did his inspection, and then they wanted the engineered drawings and plans, so they had to
Okay.
stop.
and we got to get that clarified, right? I think that's a good point. As I recall, one of the exhibits that you presented, or it's in the package at least, was dated July 2022, and it shows a retaining wall on the plan. Now, whether that retaining wall was going to be in violation of the ordinance is a different question. But there was a retaining wall on that particular plan. So it apparently was contemplated because of the topography. I mean, we're just speculating here, so we're going to find a little more about that. That retaining wall would be necessary. I think it's in one of the documents that was presented.
Yeah, but I think that's the plat, but I do think that in the timeline, the initial date was January of '22 when the inspector discovered that there was a retaining wall. So that would this was generated after that point.
I think the terminology is discovered, there was, it was an initial discovery, it wasn't maybe on an initial plan. That's the assumption I made with that term being used, discovered.
Yeah, okay.
We may get some clarification on that from the applicant.
There is a piece of the information also that's dated November 15th, 2021, revised 12/6. It's a survey plan that does not show a retaining wall.
I think we can discuss this a little more after the applicant presents and maybe get some information from the applicant at that time. That'll be the appropriate time probably to dig into the details here. So is that okay?
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right, at this point, I'd like to entertain that the applicant can then provide some testimony, if they'd like. And can you please state your name?
Derek Simmons.
Eric Simmons. Mr. Simmons, I'm going to have to swear you in, if that's all right? Sure. Could you stand and raise your right hand? Do you affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Are there any other persons that with you that are going to provide testimony?
Do you choose to speak at all?
Well, then, if you're going to, I need your full name, please.
Archie Simmons.
Archie Simmons, okay. Mr. Simmons, I'm going to swear you in. Do you affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. All right, you may proceed. I'm sorry.
I'm here more for support.
I'm sorry, say that again?
I'm here more for support.
Okay, moral support, that's always helpful, believe me. Mr. Simmons, what can you tell us about the situation?
Well, basically, upon building the house on such a sloping lot, I did find that in the process, a retaining wall would be needed, as plateauing would not be, available for that situation. I don't like erosion at all, so I try to keep everything contained. And that's for during the build and for warranty, the 1-year warranty that I provide for my homeowner. So I try to do it right the first time and get it right. And this instance, I failed to go before, I guess, the town and get the proper permits and all that stuff ahead of time. But after talking with the inspectors and going about the proper ways, after talking to them, I've just followed their guidelines the whole way and provided what I needed to provide that they asked for.
Anything in addition to the documentation you've provided that you need to provide?
Just really and truly, the length of time, why it's taking so long, is we first contacted Neil Smith Engineering. I think it was July 23rd or something like that. And I've actually contacted 5 other ones that were from Raleigh. It's very hard to find an engineer that will actually show up, and
Right.
it has actually taken, he showed up, I think, January or February, and it took still a month and a half, 2 months for him, after him saying, this is easy, this is what you're going to do, which is what I've done out there. It took 2 months or so for him to get that information, the actual documentation, the signed, sealed letter back to me so I can carry on. I mean, basically I've got about 2 or 3 weeks left worth of work on that house, and it'll be completely done. That's landscaping, stone, everything. And it could be dressed up like the rendering showed to be, so.
Well, the integrity of the wall is one thing, but more we're concerned with the variance on the height-wise.
Right.
Okay. Are there any additional questions we explore at this time?
I have a question. Can you talk to me about, first off, welcome.
Thank you.
Can you talk to me about the decision not to put any of the structure within the wetlands area?
Because I do not want to disturb any wetlands. That's how I run my business, is I don't want to encroach in wetlands to have any kind of future issues with any, state legislature of any kind. I mean, it's best to build the house and do it the right way, really.
Yeah,
A lot wetter.
Well, I'm not an engineer or a builder. My background is as an environmental lawyer, so, check on your answer there. But my question, where I don't have any expertise, whether or not there are structural or engineering building issues that might be incurred if you all had encroached into that wetlands area, if you could educate me.
Yep, if you were to move further and further down, it got wetter and wetter and wetter. So I chose to keep it up as high as I could to keep it out of that water table. And we still had to install drain lines all the way underneath, and I think it's still water running out at this moment right now. And we'll continue to do that probably forever because of all the springs and the water table being so high. So that's why we started digging the basement out and found that it was wet just even in that higher part as high as I could go. Because I think I put it 4 or 5 feet from the setback, the building envelope setback. So I did not want to move any closer because it just got mushy. And they actually sank a machine in there up over the tracks and into the cab. So I knew that that was far enough and I needed to do the proper drainage there to be able to continue on with the build.
What future problems would you anticipate if you did build on, ground with a high water table? I mean, what types of things would one anticipate running into down the road?
The way I did it, there's not going to be any issues,
Well,
but if
No, I mean, if you had.
I had
You had been 15 feet, 20 feet back.
major settling and sinking of the whole structure, I would say, by inches, if not more. And the possibility of it sliding, I mean, there's a lot of pressure against that front wall, and the wetter the soil is down there towards the stream and deeper into the wetlands, it's just going to become a mush, and you can't get it to properly settle correctly. So,
that sinking that you're speaking of and the settling of the home, would that be based upon it just being in a wetlands in general, or upon you making, a determination on the site after reviewing how wet it was and the topography in that area?
right, I chose to just keep it out as far as I could, because I didn't, like I said, the further we got as far as digging, we knew that the problem was more so on the back side of that house, which if I were to move the house further back, it would have created even more of an issue back down there. Right, more of the issue would have been under the entirety of the house. I'd say that if you were to move it further back, because we caught the back half or the back end of the house is in the wettest part, you could say. And so with all the drains that I've got, it catches all that, and it was able to firm some of that up. But as far as being able to actually maneuver machines and manpower and all that down deeper into the wetlands, I don't think that would have been possible. Correct.
The two plat maps that were in the application, one that's on the screen now that I believe is maybe initial, done in 21, shows the finished floor of the house at 90 feet. The second one doesn't show the finished floor. The second one shows a retaining wall, so that, I'm guessing, is more of a as-built type reflection. Do you know where the finished floor is today? I mean, I know I'm asking you to maybe speculate because we don't have anything from a surveyor, or do you have that information?
I don't have it with me, but it's exactly the same. So I used his points that he used, my surveyor, on the exact, so the house is actually sitting exactly where the 90-foot finished floor height is, because I didn't move the house left, right, back, forward, after, from this anyway, so I
But
followed that.
up or down, either?
No, it should be fairly close to that, because we used a benchmark, but should be within a foot or so, I would say, of that.
Okay. Yeah, so I guess the next question I'm getting to then is, from when this was drawn up, I mean, this shows those slopes as pretty tight there. But it's a pretty different site layout compared to what it is today. I mean, the back retaining wall isn't even on this one.
This is the original. So
Right.
what happened was after, I think it was Jeff came and said, you need to get these engineered and all that stuff. Then that's when I had my surveyor come out, and he actually plotted those retaining walls onto the one that shows the retaining wall. So the retaining walls were added on the fly. That's the original, and then they were added like end of July is when I had my surveyor come out and put them on the map so that we could present them to the town and show them where the actual retaining walls started, stopped, and stuff like that.
Yep, okay. Yeah, that, the point, of the five things we're thinking about, the one is, was the particular hardship created by the applicant, and that's kind of the one I'm looking at here is, do we consider that the issues I mean, I think that's really the same one they're talking about with the wetlands question, which seems to be pretty clear. But initially, at some point, it was thought that this house could be built without those retaining walls. And hence, that's what this drawing shows.
Well, when a lot has all the trees on it, it looks completely different when it doesn't. And especially once you start getting into the building process of it and when you see your actual finished floor height in person on that lot, it changes completely. There was no reason for me with trees on the lot to assume that I thought that maybe I could get away with not doing a retaining wall. But once you start getting into it, there was just no way from where the deck and the front door and all that is to be able to plateau sharply enough without it just constantly washing away to be able to do it. So that's why I had to have some kind of barrier in there to hold back the field.
Understood.
And the circle drive, I still plan on doing, just like the rendering showed, and, dressing it up, basically. I mean, I don't want it to continue looking like it looks now. I mean, I want to break it up and kind of do planting and foliage and stuff like that, so.
Sure. Okay. That's helpful. Thank you.
Are you bringing in the fill? I mean, you've got to bring that up pretty high, right? I mean, the rendering almost looks like it at street level. You're down nearly 12 feet from street to the front of the building.
No, not the finished floor height is pretty close to the street view. And if you look, there's probably 24, 28 inches from the top of the deck down to the bottom of the plants. So if I need to, I'll bring in some more fill to bring that up a little bit more, just to have a little bit more fall away from the house. But I do plan on doing a gravel circle drive in there, and on where you see on the retaining wall side of where the garage and stuff, where the red plant is, I can build that up a little bit more just to kind of screen a little bit even more of that wall to where there's not as much of the wall showing. And then again, screenings like crazy all against that retaining wall to try to hide it as well, to soften the looks of it.
How many loads of dirt have you brought into the front of the house?
Oh, probably 20, something like that, 15,
A lot more than normal.
really.
On a normal topography lot, what's an average?
Correct. What's the normal? On my fill, I usually bring in two tandem loads, and just to dress everything up, but this, I hadn't even dressed it up yet, and I'm at probably 20 loads.
But
I'll probably need 4 or 5 more.
I think we mentioned, this before, is the suitable or the very buildable lots are all gone. The fill-in lots are the last ones to get picked over. So we're this is the same situation I remember a couple months ago. We're putting homes in lots that are really not conducive, without significant engineering, retaining walls like we see two here, loads of dirt. One of the recommendations is when we know, I mean, there's trees on there, but there's things called contour lines. You just count them, multiply by 2 if you're on the GIS in Moore County, and then you understand over 150 feet, you're dropping nearly 24 feet. I mean, that's pretty good. You drop a tennis ball there, it's going to go to the bottom rather quickly once it gains some momentum. I would be concerned about, if you're not, rhetorical question here, if it's not a hard surface of that driveway, you're going to lose it after a couple good rains, and it's going to be, down in the creek somewhere.
The drive will be concrete.
Okay,
All that will
that's
be,
probably a good idea.
Yep.
But I think if we know the slope and the contour and there's going to be challenges and people are going to be forced nearly to put in retaining walls, whether they want to do that expense, because that's what it is, it's an expense, taking away from probably their profit. It's not people go there to buy retaining walls. They go to build buy the home. Someone from the village may need to go walk the train with them and just say right off the bat, hey, you cannot put a home here without managing this slope through retaining, managing this slope through some type of drainage, or we're going to continue to see folks trying to build on less suitable lots, and they're going to come in here and say, well, I started off and I didn't think I needed a retaining wall. It would appear to me that you would, and then we do these variances after the fact. I mean, just trying to get ahead of it So, it's very clear to a builder, and it's also very clear to, the village planners what needs to be done prior to, stirring up the dirt down there and everything. It's not a question, it's just, I have a feeling as we try to use these fill-in lots, we're going to continue to see these reoccurring problems.
Fortunately,
And-
that's probably the case, yep.
Yeah.
Yes, Jeremy?
Eric, do you have any other water management along the front of that house? I would guess by the foundation, but anything other than that?
So I've got foundation drains or footing drains that would be at the bottom, so any water that goes to the house, it's bituthine, which is the black, kind of rubberized on the.
Typical, right, of a home
And
and
it's actually
foundation.
behind that is also waterproofed with SureCoat, and it's probably got 2 or 3 coats of that. As everybody knows, a leaky basement is no fun for a builder to deal with, so I made sure to do that. Water will actually run down, go to those drains, and go out. And then for any drainage for as far as runoff, we will make sure to have any kind of check dams or anything like that that will stop water from just rushing down. I've not been able to put those in yet, as, just wanted to wait for kind of a word on this to see where we stand, so I can get an idea from my landscaping and stuff like that.
Culverts closer to the road, anything like that that would move the water, anything of that nature. Probably would do some casual grading, I would probably imagine.
And grass where I can in swales, so no runoff or no washouts or anything like that.
Help me understand about the design of the house, about the decision to put the garage in the lower level in the rear of the home.
So this came, my uncle's an architect, and this actually is basically a rendering of my grandmother's old house in Sanford. And we were just playing around with the idea of what house we could put on the lot, and this is what came to his mind. I didn't want to do a front-facing garage. I didn't want the garage to be the main thing that you saw in the front of the house, so I did want to keep it underneath to kind of be free with the facade of the front of the house, basically. So I chose to do that to where there can be usable basement living space underneath, and then, of course, your parking in your garage underneath.
Why would you not want to do a garage on the front of the house?
I just didn't, I didn't want a front-facing garage on that particular house, and then to bring in not just the fill for the front yard, then you're talking about filling in that whole garage area as well, which is probably another 10 or 15 loads, just to bring all the garage up, and then also to make the yard somewhat level and usable, because otherwise, there's no backyard, there's nothing, no entertainment space, basically, for kids to play around or people to hang out in.
Point out that you're setting at your 30-foot setback as well. In your opportunity to do so would have required you to probably come into a setback, I would probably imagine.
Right.
What's the width of a normal garage of a house?
25 feet or so, 26.
Depth of the width?
The width is about 26, depth is about 24 or 5.
Did you provide any plans to the village initially that may have indicated a retaining wall during the planning stages to get your permit?
Not a retaining wall, but the plans that were submitted were these, where it was submitted with a survey with topography and showing that the basement was in X position on that plot plan.
Anyone else? I have a couple of questions. I think actually a couple of points were brought up that was relevant to Mr. Jones's comment relative to design decisions and whether or not the hardship was a part of that. Now, the neighboring properties on both sides are similar, if not almost exactly the same sloped lot, and yet they apparently were able to, without a variance. How would you explain that?
If I'm not mistaken, the one on the left had pretty severe issues with wetlands issues that had to be taken care of.
Okay?
The one on the right sits at a little bit higher elevation. It's also their lot, if you look, it does not slope nearly as hard. It is, the right side of their house is not sloping as bad, so it doesn't have to deal with as much, whereas mine, the whole entire front across
Okay,
was-
so you're saying it
was
is
sloping.
slightly different, is that
sorry?
right? You're saying it is slightly different, is that
I
correct?
would say the one on the right definitely is.
Different enough,
Sure.
okay.
And the placement, if you'll look at their front doors compared to where mine is, the one that Mr. Jackson built is pretty dead center of the house, plenty of room to slope off. And then I think the same for the one on the right, whereas mine is off to the left, just part of the design. And with that being said, with the deck coming out, you've only got, I think, 13 feet to the end of the house from the deck to basically slope down some 12 feet, I think, something like that, 10 feet. So in order to do that without just a constant washout is pretty hard to attain.
I do going to go back to this question I had about this document, which was presented as part of the staff report, which is, indicates it's possibly a foundation location plan dated 7/28/22. It shows a retaining wall that extends some over 24 feet into the setback. It calls it a block retaining wall. Now, there's no indication that the retaining wall may be over 3 feet. I mean, you may have thought that this was going to be less than 3 feet at the time. So during the construction process, when did you realize that you were going to have to exceed the 3 feet PDO requirements for the retaining wall?
I'd say when I've got the foundation walls built and saw the amount of slope that I was having to deal with on the whole entire property, that once you get the foundation in and you can eyeball and see exactly where you're going to need to bring any fill up to, make the whole lot work out, especially in the front, then that's kind of where I came to it. So that would probably be around April, something like that. So it took a while to dig the basement, get everything squared away there. And then once we got the block walls up, I noticed that it was just a lot higher than anticipated, honestly.
Eureka moment, right?
There.
So this rendering is interesting. So what do you anticipate? I think that the documentation said something to the effect that it will vary in height from, as I recall, 9 feet to probably 12 inches at 1 foot. I assume the 12 foot is at the front here, after fill, of course.
Well, the 12 inches is going to be right there at the front, the closest to us. And then I think it's 9¼ feet at the house is what it was. So,
Based upon a potential landscaping or fill plan, is that the
correct.
idea?
And honestly, if need be, I could put a small 3 feet retaining wall at the bottom near the garage and make that almost a raised bed there. So it would actually subtract. It'd be a 6-foot retaining wall at max, basically,
At that point, which may be
at
back
that
next
point.
to
And
the
then
house.
it would come up to the 12 inches at the driveway.
Maria, the question is, the retaining wall height is measured after fill and compaction and final?
From grade to the top.
Okay, after fill and completion of the
Correct.
construction, okay.
Yeah, I think that's a good thought there. I wanted to ask, actually, in the rendering, you have a cap shown on the top of the wall,
Which would be count in the height, yeah.
right? So in what you have out there now, you've got regular block walls, 8 inches tall block. So say you get 5 blocks plus a cap is probably what you're 42 inches. And the only restriction on a retaining wall is the height. It doesn't, there's not a restriction on how far it goes into the setback. Is that correct? So really, we're concerned about, and we don't actually know where that point is going to be, like, as of today. He's not going to be 9 feet deep at the 30-foot setback. He's probably going to be shallower than that, and right now, we don't even have final grade in there.
So that means we don't really know where the 3 feet or 3.5 foot variance is required. It's somewhere along there. We don't really know where it's going to break. until you end up filling and completing.
And if it made a difference, it could be terraced, as you say.
What would, I guess, what would the lower part, say, right at the bottom of that retaining wall where it's 9.25 feet or 9.5 feet, and I came up 3.5 feet, so now you're left with 6, and I came back and terraced that again, but you've got that void that is still 6 feet. You know, I was just, I guess the way I was looking at it is if I could add the 3.5 foot retaining wall at the bottom and be left with the 6 foot, I guess I'd be going for the 6 foot variance.
Oh, so
that,
it would
or
still be
3
a
foot.
variance regardless.
Right.
Okay.
I believe so, and if I could.
Portion.
Yeah, for a portion of it. And if I could figure out a way to make that go away, I certainly would, but I don't know without actually doing it. I mean, it's.
You have no magic for that? No, okay.
Plants is all I can really.
Yeah, I don't know if this is, I mean, I feel like we've had this discussion before, but if it's appropriate, but it does seem like, aside from a variance, there would be a way to construct a perpendicular retaining wall that, at the setback line, that would make this primary retaining wall no greater than 42 inches above grade. So,
Also control some future erosion, too.
yeah,
Certainly slow down the water coming off that.
I was going to say something on that point as well. I think you're already fighting the water, and I think you're already fighting the topography, and it certainly seems like that on the other side of the lot and the rains that we've had. Do you see any home with any design built without, let me state it this way. In your application, you stated the topography of the lot requires the use of retaining walls, and so I take that comment as just requires in general. Is that your thoughts, or is it just requires retaining walls for this home design?
I'd say for the lot in general. I mean, even if I did, I think a house with, it's like next door, they put a walk-in door on the side, and the homeowner that's there has built a terraced section. So it'd be hard to make grade work out without it just completely falling off and dealing with erosion, as both homes have.
If you would have built a side entry garage across the front, with an entry coming in and turning, then at that point, I'm not sure you would have needed a retaining wall.
But on the backside, for sure, a very tall one. If you had a,
Style garage entry.
right, if you had a true first floor side entry, where that bottom retaining wall is, that would have gone all the way up to the first floor height to make that work.
Probably allow you to build the courtyard, either that or you would go into the wetlands.
Right.
What I'm trying to get at is what's sticking with me is, did the home design or did the applicant cause the hardship in this case? And that's where I think, that's part of what we have to decide as a board. And is the garage placement causing the hardship? Is the home design causing the hardship? And that's where some of the questions are coming from. But in your state, even a courtyard-style home garage entry, you would still need the use of a retaining wall.
It really depends on the placement of the front door and all that stuff. I mean, it's access into the home is what I was looking at whenever I decided to do the retaining wall, because when there's no room to basically terrace and all that because of the front door placement, I had to do it that way. I was not initially planning on having to do a retaining wall, because you can look at a topo map and see the slope, and you can get an idea of what you need to do. But once you're there on site and actually have the foundation in place and the building there, then everything comes to light, and you start seeing your finished product, basically.
Probably that's a good time for me to ask your credentials. How long have you been building homes?
Started my company in August of 2016, and prior to that, I worked for another contractor that was out of Raleigh, and I was with them for 7 years. And before that, I did commercial construction for about 2.
Close to 15 years worth of construction experience. So you,
But never having to build on any lots like this. This is the first time I've ever had to build on a lot like this.
Hopefully it'll be the
And
last.
in the future, they will get passed up. So,
pardon me for laughing, yeah.
I mean, honestly, I bought this lot because ran out of lots in 21. And so I was kind of desperate for a lot. This one popped up. I thought, shoot, I'll go for it. And it's turned into be this.
It's slim pickings these days, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, and it really is. I mean, even in talking with all builders and inspectors and stuff like that, it's, like you were just saying, that the buildable lots are pretty well gone. Or unless people just want to hold on to them until they really can take it to the bank. So,
Any additional questions, concerns, comments? Now, if there are any others in the audience who wish to provide some testimony, we'd be happy to hear that. Excuse me, ma'am, if you'd like to ask a question or enter some testimony, I'd be happy to swear you in and.
I don't mind being sworn in, but I don't have anything that I really want to, well, I have questions.
Okay, good. I know, I know we have. Well, then, this might be a good time if you would like to provide some testimony. Oh, no. Now, I'm going to swear you in. And first of all, I'm going to ask your name, full name, please.
Cheryl Robinson.
Jill Robinson?
Robinson, I am the Mrs. Robinson.
No, good. Well, okay. Now, would you raise your right hand, please?
Certainly.
Do you affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Help me God.
Oh, thank you. Now you may proceed.
My concern is that every time I see another truckload, every time I see Johnny Harris's trucks show up, I mean, they did our landfill, obviously, because we had a ton of it we had to do. But watching the trucks pour in, roll steady for hours past my house and dumping lots and lots of dirt, it kept raising the property, and I became more and more concerned about the runoff onto my property.
Now, you're the house, from the street, are you on the left or the right?
I'm the one on the right, the one that's been there for 20 years.
Okay, thank you.
Now, one of the things that we did when we built the house was we took every precaution to make sure that any runoff that hit our land was taken care of. But it was all coming from the front. It was coming down the street, and it came across the common area. I don't know we used to call them causeways or whatever, but the area in front. And it came across, and we made sure that when we put our driveway in, we put a little berm in it that took care of that. And it ran off into grassy areas on either side. Mostly the land at that point was going, from my view, to the right or to the east, to the west.
Monticello.
Yeah, and no, away from Monticello. And it's Monticello, by the way.
Monticello, that's right, excuse me. Sorry.
It's a Thomas Jefferson house.
I know.
So important we get the streets right. One of the things that we were concerned about, and we ran into it the very first year we were there, was hurricanes hitting with that backlash and all the downpour of rain that we were getting. It came pouring down the street in front of us onto our property, and our driveway was being eroded enormously. So when we put the gravel, or the pea gravel in, it's not pea gravel, it's bluestone, and had it compacted completely, it took care of the drainage problem because the water pretty much soaked through that and went underground then. But we also put in a drain area at the base of our driveway, which is a parking area also besides where you drive into the garage. And that took care of draining the rest of the water away. Well, now I'm seeing the dirt next to me with your property, and I'm trying to decide whether or not I need to make some notice of the village about my concern about my own property and what kind of considerations they're taking to make sure I'm not intruded upon with water.
Well,
I
think-
don't care much for water, by the way.
I think you bring up a good point, and I would look to the village to make sure that erosion control during construction is properly done. And in fact, neighboring properties are not affected, as you described it might be. So I think that's a village responsibility to do that. Excuse me, Archie.
Well, you got me, and I got a lot of oversight, by the way.
I think you bring up a good point,
But my,
Mrs.
my-
Robinson.
yes, well, I see erosion on the property now, but we've had a lot of rain recently. And a lot of concern of mine is that if it's eroding now, it's going to only get worse. Of course, it would be really nice, I would love it if somebody would show me an idea that they might have for landscaping that would protect that side of the house, because you can protect it with landscaping. I
Relative
understand.
to this,
You've got a concerned neighbor, and I want to be a nice neighbor. I don't want to be a nasty little person.
what, okay, well, that's, I'm glad you pointed that out to us. Are there any other facts or considerations that you wish us to hear about?
I'm also concerned about the creek because it's part of the Cape Fear River Basin.
It is. It runs all the way down,
And-
ends up in
right.
South Carolina somewhere. Yep.
Oh, yes. Actually, it goes out at the Cape Fear River in North Carolina, right by Oak Island, somewhere down there, I think. But the problem is that you've got water going down, and I don't mean to complain, but your silt fences keep breaking down. And dirt flows right over them, and before the silt fences were put in, the water was reaching the creek, or the dirt was reaching the creek. So I get concerned about that creek, because to me, that's an environmental issue, and it's also part of probably somebody's water supply.
Right. And once again, that's an issue on construction,
Mm-hmm.
silt control, irrigation, and stormwater management too, because we have increasingly large storms, so,
Yes, it's getting to be more fun around here.
right. Okay, anything else?
I hope not.
Okay. We appreciate your testimony. Is there any questions for this witness?
Ms. Robinson, so I think a lot of what you're seeing today is we're in a what we call a quasi judicial type hearing, and that's why swearing in and the formality of the event. So specifically, we're here to discuss the ordinance of retaining walls and whether or not we can provide a variance to allow the retaining wall. Do you feel that that the current retaining wall that's in place is affecting your property?
On the other side of the property from me.
Don't feel that that retaining wall is affecting you?
No, actually, I was kind of hoping that they were going to come in and say, we're going to build one on all three sides. And then they could be open to the street. But I've been concerned about property forever. We've got 2 lots, so we're protected for the most part toward Monticello. We're protected on that side. And I never did think they would build on that lot next to me because it was the most unbuildable lot I had seen in a long time. Matter of fact, if I'd known it was for sale, I'd have bought it myself just to keep it from being built on.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, appreciate it.
You bet.
Are there any other members that wish to provide some testimony? If not, further discussion. Is there any additional further discussion on this variance? Excuse me, yes, we're still in the public hearing. Sure, of course, Mr. Simmons, you want to add some more?
To put you at ease, also on the right side, I will be doing a swale that I think it's actually partially there where water is currently not even going on that property, but it will be, sod will go down. We'll have check dams to where it'll slow all the water down to where it will not be rushing down to the creek and washing anything else away. And that's part of the landscaping that I would need to be going forward with after this meeting and getting an answer and all that. So I do want to, I'm not meaning to force any water or anything that way. It's all going to stay on my lot until it gets to the back. So a swale is in place, but a better swale will be there with sod and grass and all that stuff. So.
Okay, I'm sure they appreciate that. I'm not sure that relates to the variance directly, but it's
help that out, though.
very much appreciated by the neighbors. Thank you.
I do have one question. as you mentioned that, as you build up, the front area at 185, are you now higher than the lot at the line at 195?
That left or right?
So
Are you-
that's on the right.
Yours?
Yeah, that's
Uh,
on the right.
Without shooting, I wouldn't know. I think that our front yards are fairly close. Ours might slope a little bit more, but, I mean, there's still buildup in both lots in front of the house.
Yeah, I'm just looking, I'm only referring to the contour lines on the GIS. It does look like it drops. Obviously, as you continue to put soil in there, and I don't think you're done adding soil. Phil, are you?
Not completely. I mean, it's pretty close, but I'm not completely done. I mean, there's probably going to be 2 or 3, maybe 4 more loads, but that's just a final grade everything and make sure everything is, all erosion is controlled and all that to be able to mitigate any kind of water issues.
As you build that swell, was there any consideration of putting some type of a collection basin in there?
No,
to
because I
divert the
think
water to the rear?
if you do, what we were thinking about doing is doing riprap as well, and just almost make it look like a stream, that it's a dry stream, but to have that, and that will certainly slow water down to a crawl, even in torrential downpours, to where it'll go through the rocks, slow down, and then dissipate into the wetlands and the creek.
Thank you.
Discussion? If not, I'd like to remind the board about the standards for granting a variance. They are, number one, the applicant must show that strict application of the rules would create unnecessary hardships. State law provides several tests regarding unnecessary hardships, such as it is not necessary to show that no reasonable use can be made of the property without a variance, but the hardship must be real and substantial. Mere inconvenience or additional expense is not adequate. The hardship must be particular to the property, such as the property's location, size, or topography. Conditions common to the neighborhood or the public are not sufficient. The hardship must not have been self-created. Purchase of the property, knowing of it, may be eligible for variance is not a self-created hardship. Number two, the applicant must show that the variance would be consistent with the intent and purpose of the ordinance. Number three, the applicant must show that the variance would be consistent with the overall public welfare and that other substantial justice will be done. The variance must not create a nuisance or violation of other laws. Those are the standards for granting a variance.
Okay, so
Anyone considered whether or not they'd like to offer a motion on this?
Just before we get to that point, I couldn't go the whole time without speaking. I tried.
I was wondering.
I really
Very
tried.
well.
You won't, because I will not be providing any testimony on the case, but just more guidance to the board when we come to, time for a decision. Jack, thank you for reading out the standards. So any motion to be made, a motion template as always is prepared by staff for you guys for your consideration with areas for you to write your own individual findings and make in your motion. So just make sure that the motion is clear enough that you are moving to approve of conditions or to not grant a variance based on your particular findings for each one of those standards of review. Also, relative to conditions, Maria very well spoke to in the opening presentation that conditions that are reasonably related to the application and may be imposed or considered by the board. So if that is a consideration with a motion being made, just again, some guidance to you guys, relative to conformance with the standards, I believe that could be, as there's some uncertainty about what that finished height would be within that 17 to 18 feet of projection into the front setback, a condition could be granted that it be no taller than 4 feet, 48 inches, for example, that it be finished with another masonry type material, as you see an unfinished product, landscape to deter or to break up the visual obtrusion of that much of a wall. My opinion is that conditions related to those type items would be reasonably related to the request before you. So just some points to consider and just a helpful reminder in the motions.
Thank you.
Yeah, just kind of maybe playing devil's advocate, let's just say we vote and we do not approve a variance. Okay, so there's a couple options, I think. One, we already talked about, I think Matt said perpendicular wall, build it up to be within. What the other alternatives would be remove the wall or take it down to, the appropriate height. And if we do that, what other problems are caused by that, with grading? So I would like to think that after we reconsidered the walls and realized that the drop was too great to be without any walls, they've come up with the best plan possible. It still kind of presents us a problem because it is physically there. We're not asking for a variance to build something. The wall is built there. So, how do we minimize, also trying to also minimize not just the builder, but the future owner and the property owners on the right and left, and also the impacts to the natural water source behind there. So, I kind of can formulate in my own mind some solutions that not being there, not shooting a transit on it and looking at grades, but maybe some alternatives that, the builder now may wish not to be imposed upon them just because of the increased costs. There's also challenges now with interest rates going up and everything where you can price properties. But it's already there. It's something that we are now stuck with dealing with. How can all mutual properties and entities, find the least find the best solution with the least impacts to everybody? So, bringing up the grade, the wall, that seems like some of the simplest solutions. Because when I look at the hardship, 15 years of experience, testimony already said, hey, I had to buy this lot because I was running out of lots. That shows right there that this was going to be difficult. And
Decision.
yeah, and it's here with us with the wall built, so now it's even difficult for us to get through this problem, without making negative impacts to others.
And P.S., there's 2 more empty lots on this street up the way that I observed.
It's a good
That
rehearsal.
appear to
We'll
have
bring
the
in
same,
those
appear to have the
little
same
islands.
topography, so we hopefully.
With that point, I was going to couple with you that the problem that I see with it really is that we're looking at it during the middle of construction, and the variances that we may give today, may or may not give today, are going to be a little bit forced by that hand, a little bit. And in my mind, if the applicant would have came earlier in the process, because you pointed out, there's the lots that are
If we're-
left, and you pointed out 2 more on the road, that if earlier in the process, if we would have been given the opportunity to provide variances to allow, to help with the process, then I think that this lot is a great example of one that we would probably extend some variances to, or at least qualifies to ask for some variances. And I just want to make that known for any other further lots on that street, because now we're at a little bit of a hindrance because we don't get to make the best decisions for the variances that would be out of the best, that are in the best interest of the village and the public. I think that's the only concern.
Yeah, no, I
Making the least
understand.
worst decision.
I understand what you're saying, especially since there are empty lots on this street and, very slopey wetland lots available elsewhere in Pinehurst. However, I do hear the builder sharing with us that this lot was a bit of the devil's in the details. And he didn't really understand quite what challenges were going to be presented till he was underway. You know, there wasn't a plan from the jump to say, you know, I'm going to put in 2 really expensive retaining walls, because as Paul says, nobody, you know, no one's there to buy your wall, right? You know, that wasn't his intention. You know, it would have been wonderful if the variance application was presented to us before the wall was, but I think we might have wound up doing the same dance regardless, because I don't think he quite knew what he was getting till he, you know, began trying to level and clear and just had the wet.
Although,
The height of the retaining wall.
Right, right. I mean, it's
I mean, it
hard.
may have been obvious that some retaining wall may have been necessary, but it may have seemed at the time, who knows, this is all speculation, that it would be within the code.
now, he made a decision not to build into the wetlands, but he gave some logic today of that reasoning that he
Sure.
did not want to build into the wetlands, and I think it made some sense. So during the middle of construction, this is kind of the result of we didn't know how tall the retaining wall was going to be. So,
Sure.
you know, my first instinct was that it was going to be possible that the design of the home caused a hardship, but then when you look at everything involved, it's more complex than that. You know, it's not one thing, so.
I agree, except for the finished floor elevation. Like, to me, that's the only thing that really could be different, that would have not precluded a retaining wall. You know, with this design, you might have always needed one, but the retaining wall would not have had to exceeded the minimum height in the setback,
And if the first floor elevation had been slightly lower, then the retaining wall wouldn't have to be quite as high.
right?
Right, correct.
Now, I don't know that you would have, what I don't know is, could you get the height on the ground floor? You know, could you have gone down? That I don't know. So while I do think that
Well,
is something
also-
that could have been affected differently, I'm not 100% sure on that.
Right, but considering that it is a parcel that's next to a wetlands, and more than likely, even digging outside of the wetlands, you found, and so a deeper foundation with a lower front floor elevation would have caused additional.
Yeah, that's a good point. Mo water, mo problems.
How low could you have gone, Matt, do you believe, on that floor height?
Well, I'm just going, you know, if we're talking about potentially with Phil, we're looking at the 30-foot point, 6 feet-ish. I think that was the number that was shared right now. So if you're at, you know, I mean, if you take those 3 steps down and you go down, you know, 30 inches, you're getting closer to you know, a pretty tight
Water.
42. Yeah.
Have a lower floor potential.
I mean, also in my mind, the difference of an approval with conditions and a disapproval with the expectation that, okay, he's going to have to somehow get that wall to 36 or to 42
That's going to happen,
is
right?
maybe not a whole lot different. Like, I can come up with conditions and an approval where the wall needs to be to 48, 50 inches. Also, I would love to get that screen out of there, because I feel like in item,
I think it's above 30 inches, it has to have a screen. You were talking about the fencing on top of the wall?
right, right, but that's my point, is if you do something to accommodate less above grade at the setback, then that's going to make it not as tall, you know, to the end of the wall. So you wouldn't need the screen, because you wouldn't be
Wouldn't be at 30
Right.
inches?
towards the back, but not all the way into the setback, is my point. And I feel like that, in terms of what's the spirit of the ordinance, the spirit is to keep the setback, you know, what's within the setback in a certain appearance and character, and the screen, you know, in a way, is more obtrusive than the,
Maybe I should get sworn in real quick.
Is the screen a fence?
And Derek, I might need you for clarification there. So if you would, Jack, please.
Do you affirm that the testimony you will be giving is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
What is the height requirement in which a barrier is required, and is it over 30 inches?
34, it's got to be over 30 inches, so if it's 29 and 7/16, you're good. 29 to 15, 16, you're good. But
So you could meet the requirements of the PDO and still have to have a rail by building code.
Correct.
So
So I'm thinking of an extra condition is what I'm thinking of.
Here would be my concern about your suggestion of lowering that grade. Then we're going to be coming off the road with a higher grade. It's going to pull more water off the road.
Well, I'm not saying lower. What do you?
Oh, I thought you were talking about reducing the grade in front of the house by 30 inches.
No, I'm talking about basically a condition that requires a secondary retaining wall
Oh,
to some
okay.
specified height, such that it also removes the requirement for a fence.
To the left of the one there, yeah, with like a perpendicular, which is actually going to make that wall stronger.
So basically, you'd end up having a retaining wall that kind of follows
That
in
makes
this
the most sense.
rendering the outline of the driveway, perpendicular to the existing.
You're going to want that anyways, because you're going to have water coming out of that vegetation area to the left, and it's going to be seeping onto that concrete, you know.
Way to construct the retaining wall on the side of the home to where the fencing or the screen across the top could be eliminated.
Well, I think that's where Matt was going, I believe.
Yeah, that's what I said about
You know, with a retaining wall that follows generally the curve of the driveway and fill behind that such that the retaining wall ends up being, at least within the setback area, less than 30 inches. Is that correct?
Guys, sorry, that's so loud. Explain to me how that terminates at the
So-
back. I'm just trying to visualize it. How does that wrap around that curve? So,
pull up the foundation survey, please, Maria.
what I could probably do is go to the front of that wall where it's saying it's 12 inches out of the ground, go down to 29 inches, and then go straight across, and that's kind of where you're going to see your other retaining wall killing off into the bank, basically. So in order to make that whole thing 30 inches, though, that bottom retaining wall is going to have to come up to, or 3 feet, 4 feet, it's going to have to come up and be a 5-foot retaining wall.
Well, no,
To
we're
meet that
talking about
requirement.
within the setback area particularly.
Yeah, but you could put the retaining wall outside of the setback. Like you'd have room to do that and build up. Is that what I'm saying?
So you're saying that inside the setback, I can have as tall of a retaining wall as I want, or?
Well, I'm saying if you put this secondary retaining wall outside of the setback, yeah, I may not, my condition on the fence may
Only
not
5
be
feet
able to
between
hold.
the
But basically, if you put that wall outside of the setback and then it builds up the grade to, let's just go with the 42, since that's the code, then as far as the setback's concerned, that new second retaining wall is outside and it doesn't matter.
So as long as it's inside the building setback, you're saying it can be 5 or 6 feet? Bring it up to within 42 inches of
Right.
top.
Now, to Jules's point, what you would have to figure out is when you come up to taper up the driveway, how to do that in such a way that you don't exceed the retaining wall
Outside
height
the septic, yeah,
on
the
the
setback.
side where you're having access down to the
Driveway,
garage.
yeah,
But
right.
And there's not a lot of room there. I mean, there's like 5 feet. So to be able to kill it off in that amount of time is it's pretty short. I mean, that's going to be the hard part, because really to make that work, I'd probably have to come maybe halfway up the retaining wall.
Well-
ish.
I could imagine the driveway itself having to taper to accommodate, and then you don't have a turn that you can negotiate, right?
I mean, I would be curious and entertain basically like asking the applicant to look into options and to come back with a recommendation for what's the best case that they could do in that setting.
Well-
If we're entertaining something with conditions, then I don't want to come up with a condition height that's 48 if 52 is really where it needs to be, or if, you know what I'm saying?
We
Is that
could,
reasonable?
we could, in fact, if that's the consensus here, do a continuation of this hearing and reassemble in July.
Yeah, we're not trying to extend your pain, but we don't want to, with conditions, put you in a box that ultimately becomes unworkable to you, and you're, cuffed with a suggestion that looked great at the table, and in reality, not so much.
Or do we offer to the applicant, if we can resolve it today, we don't have to punt it to July, which allows him his 2 weeks to complete that versus more rain, more dirt that's going to get washed all over the place. So I look at it as, there's a contractor, there's an engineer. I mean, there's 10 courses of block there. Okay, about 80 some inches, right? Okay, put a top cap on there, that's what, 3 inches? Okay, so you can, a top cap plus 3 courses if we're trying to get out of a variance, right? And then
I
that's
think
where
maybe
you have to,
5. Block's 8 inches tall. 42 inches is three
okay,
and a half feet.
yep. Thank you for
Well,
that.
a new retaining wall would require a foundation for the retaining wall. And I suspect, correct me if I'm wrong here, Maria, now that a retaining wall would require a development permit now, so that would apply in this case or not?
It
A new
requires
retaining
the-
wall, another retaining wall.
You would have to submit more information on what the new wall would be.
We've already given him the, but making an assumption, we gave him the variance to do that. He's agreeable to it.
I see.
And then we resolve the problem now. I just think we're going to run out of options.
Well, that's reasonable. I just don't know if we
Reasonable
need to
options
give
anyways.
if we're going to do a condition, if we need to be able to give the specifics of what that height would be, because I don't know that we know enough to do that today. But I mean, what you're saying is reasonable. He wouldn't have to design it. The schematic would seem to be sufficient to show that, I wouldn't need to see the full design of the wall to know that it could be done with the grading is really the question.
What were you trying to achieve? Will we be trying to achieve a shorter wall as possible or trying to take away the grade?
Well, I guess probably the shorter wall.
The shorter wall would be the most important, what you're trying, okay.
I think it seems like we all agree it's peculiar to the site. The quote I heard was, this is maybe one of the most unbuildable lots ever. So that definitely would fall under peculiar to the site. And I do think once the construction is complete, that the runoff is not going to be an issue anymore, so.
Height.
I think
And
we
that's
can say,
a-
I
Maximum
think we might
height
be
and
able to
then
say within
fixing
the
it's up to
variance,
him.
though. Because we're splitting the difference, right? I mean, 80, roughly, sir, what's from your footer to the top of the wall, do you know what that is?
Right now, I think it's 9 1/4 feet.
What?
9 1/4 feet, I believe, but I can verify that again tomorrow, but like you were saying earlier, the resolution and being able to move forward and really wrap it up, it is an eyesore. I get that. I completely get that. And I'd certainly like to get it finished so that everybody on that street can not ride by and see it, how it's looked for the last 8 months or so. That's kind of the reason in trying to find some kind of an answer. Even if I were to do another retaining wall, and I think that it would have to come outside of that setback slightly. I don't know how far, but, even if I were to be able to raise the new retaining wall, say 4 feet, 4.5 feet, almost half of what that is, I think that would be very doable. And I can work on different ways. That guardrail up there might be showing slightly higher than what it needs to be. What it is the dead men that are in there right now, I think are a foot and a half down from the top of that wall. So I can go to where those are just underneath the surface. So that gives me a foot and a half. So I'm only doing like a 2-foot guardrail, basically. So it's a little bit less of an eyesore in that respect.
How high would that wall be at that point? You're speaking of doing what you're talking about?
It'd still be the same. I would be lowering the grade between the deck and the wall. The height of the retaining wall wouldn't change any at all, except for if I were able to do a 4-foot, 5-foot retaining wall down below, I could fill that up, and that would decrease. Each one of them would be 4.5-ish.
So I'm sort of cluing on what you said here. So it sounds like you were honing in on a condition that says the the builder will either construct a retaining wall and associated fill such that the remaining retaining wall will have a height no greater than in the setback area, X number.
It's long.
And let, if I could offer maybe some objective criteria for that. I mean, we've talked about what the typical height of the course of that block is, plus a cap. Maybe that's your maximum that you allow. Maybe it's for a run of, if you see, again, there's 20 some odd feet of linear footage of this retaining wall as it currently exists within the front setback. So maybe not to exceed a length of 15 feet encroaching into the front setback.
Along the lines where I was going, I would like to put a length on it and a height, and then at some point in time, let the builder do his work, as long as it's achievable, to make sure that that's what he hits.
In those parameters.
And whether or not we want to put it as a double retaining wall or leave it as a single, I think that at that point in time, it would be up to him to just achieve that. And so our discussion then becomes, what's our maximum height that we want to allow him to have, as well as the length?
Maximum height is within the setback area. Right.
But if I understood what he said, correct me if I didn't capture this, but you're saying that of the wall that's there right now, you could possibly remove courses that are there?
Not really, not the way it's designed now with,
Okay.
with what Neil did from, he basically said 1 foot from the top of that block to run the threaded rod through.
Right.
And do it that way. I think if I were to remove one of those, it kind of goes against his engineering. that he
Unless
had.
you have more than a foot between the rods and the top right now.
I think it
Kind of, I know I
Tieback.
leapt off that I shouldn't have with this route, but the way he's designed it now is based on what's there. So I think changing his design would change.
I think appearance-wise, it would look worse if we tried to lower that front. I mean, versus having two retaining walls, I just really think it
And build fill in
would.
between.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, you can landscape it pretty nice in that little.
Stone across the
Yeah,
front as well.
Sure, it'd probably look pretty attractive.
The application did not request a certain height. And I'll talk about specifics here. So the application did not request, can I have a variance? I just want alleviation of the ordinance. So I think it's up to us to determine what's the maximum height. We can't give Derek full, blow, right, to do what he wants to do wherever retaining walls. I think if we determine as a board that a retaining wall is necessary, and a variance is prudent, then I think what we do is establish a maximum height, simply maximum height and a maximum run into the setback area. And then I think we've done our job, because anything else we discuss really has to do with appearances of the wall.
Well, and I guess that is part of our discussion, because there's part of me that thinks there's probably a creative way to not even need a variance. But, yeah, I mean,
Why you give variances, though? I mean, well, before the wall's built.
Say not-
But too late,
right.
it's already built,
Would
you
be
know?
preferable,
Matt can do
no
his work
question.
and help the guy.
I mean, I'm open to something today, if we could word it in a way that.
I think if
but-
we get that, perpendicular wall coming off where that corner of the building is, I don't know how many feet would be required.
I mean, he's going to have it
Wall,
designed
I'm okay
anyway.
with that as well, if you want to put that into condition.
Yeah, that second, I would say if he's agreeable to it, I mean, we could be done with it today.
Yeah, I prefer that we don't do too much engineering. I prefer to specify what the result should be.
Sure.
Result of granting.
And again, from a staff perspective, it needs to be, any conditions need to be objective enough that we know that a perpendicular wall to be able to bring in enough fill to reduce, again, if we're really looking at what the variance request is for, what the code is for, it's for a height projecting into the setback. So if it can be attained, whether by this means or another means at a certain height, what difference would it really ultimately make?
Fair
There's
enough.
8.5 and 9.5.
We don't need to specify a retaining wall, we just need to specify what height we're going to allow in the setback.
And I think with that being said, I think if I were to start off at the garage corner where that retaining wall meets the garage, start off at 4.5 feet, at finished height of 4.5 feet. By the time it curves around and deads into the hillside, as long as it's under the 42 inches, it's okay, right? I mean, I think I can make that work. I mean, I think that's completely doable. That way it'll curve around and then be perpendicular for a few feet with the existing retaining wall. And at that point, it'll be less than 42 inches anyways.
That's right, so it
And
won't
then
matter.
I'll backfill and we can go from there.
That come into your driveway portion at all?
I can keep it, I think, close enough and far enough away, because judging from the buffer or the plant bed that's between the wall and the garage, or the driveway, I think it's 12 feet. I'd like to make it a little bit smaller if I can, just if I need to move that driveway over just a tad, because it is hugging the property line right now as it sits, so.
How wide is the driveway anticipated to be right now?
Right now, at that point, like 12 feet, which
Well,
is
12 feet's not bad,
not bad.
I've seen
But
10
going
feet.
downhill, it's a little bit
right?
different, but.
There's not a lot of snow.
Right, and my intentions honestly were if people are gonna park for the evening or weekend, whatever, you pull in the garage. If you're gonna be in and out, you pull in the Circle Drive anyways, in and out of the house.
Right.
And drive, so that's kind of where my mind went anyways.
So if we're saying 4.5 feet potentially at the 30-foot mark, and you were talking about what would be the length into the setback that we would want to allow that. You know, if you said you got a 30-foot setback, you could say 10 feet, up to 10 feet.
Now, is it 18 feet into the setback now, or did I read that?
No, right now, that he is 18 feet into the setback. So that would mean for 8 feet from the end of his wall towards the house, he would have to make sure that that height does not exceed the current maximum, which is 33.5 feet.
I would go along with anything that you develop there as a condition. I'm actually okay with just giving him a linear length and overall height.
Maximum height.
Maximum height. If we want to get into the double wall, I mean, and he tends to lean that way.
I'm a little hesitant to describe how to accomplish it.
Yeah, I'm fine to not
I
specify
prefer to
that.
describe the end result we're looking for as a condition.
Height, and then we could just do an overall height of the retaining wall. We could do an overall length into the setback of the retaining wall. And if we wanted to make a condition of step up or the secondary retaining wall, I think we just make that a condition. And then if you want to create an overall height of that, then I just think we go with that. That should give staff enough leeway, but I'm okay with just giving him the height in the run and letting him figure it out. I think he's kind of leaning towards that way anyway.
Yeah, I think what you guys have before you is someone who is very open and is listening and has been very great for staff to work with, and who I truly feel will listen to all the concerns you've raised and probably make it better than what any resulted condition would be.
Felt that the condition needed to have the secondary retaining wall, then I think we just leave it as vague as that. Would that give staff the okay, or should we just provide I'm okay with just a length and a height overall.
So
Can we
Have a
say
draft.
something like a length and a height, and then to consider the possibility of, not, no, you're making faces at me, Alex, you don't like it.
It may very well be your last meeting, the last opportunity for me. to
My
do that.
last opportunity to really get you.
So we need to provide a variance for the existing retaining wall, right? We need to provide,
Well, it's just in general.
Retaining wall in general for the alleviation of the.
okay, yeah, and then the length into the setback. Okay, and then if additional second retaining wall is,
Well, the
know,
length of the
One
setback,
statement will
it's,
cover it.
okay, will be within the variance in the setback. Okay,
wall is there, so, I mean, the length is set
yeah,
to some extent.
Then we set the length.
To some extent, I mean, but the height of the wall from the graded finished product is something I think we've been discussing, and how that's accomplished is a different, can be accomplished in a number of different ways, let me put it that way. And so we may want to describe that something like the retaining wall cannot be extended and the existing retaining wall, the maximum height from grade cannot be greater than?
I have a draft
Excellent.
condition, if you guys want
Excellent.
to hear it and give me your
Excellent. So
comments.
this is a draft now, this is not an
This
emotion,
is just a
right?
draft condition. The height of the retaining wall may not exceed 54 inches for 10 feet into the setback. That last part probably needs to be reworded.
That's doable, though. I could make that work, for sure. Because
With
the way it slopes,
overwall
so-
not extending, what is it, 18 feet now? You know what I mean? So you can't add to.
I think that not to exceed, not to encroach more than 10 feet into the front setback.
Part that is over the allowable 3.5 feet, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
That's because if I know how far from the top of that existing retaining wall, so you're saying 54 inches, that would let me know where I need to be with the new retaining wall if I choose to do one.
Find a way to
And have
accomplish
it,
that.
yeah, and the way it slopes so hard anyway, you kill back in, it dead ends back into the hill fairly quickly. I mean, it goes from
Forget-
9.25 feet to 12 feet in, 25 feet, but it actually could be less than that once I finish grade and all that stuff.
Don't forget the cap.
Right. And the cap won't be 4 inches. It's not going to be a concrete cap like that. It'll probably be a stone, probably 2-inch cap. So, but that'd be finished product.
So the way I heard that, Matt, is something this is all not a motion, this is just discussion, something to the effect of not to exceed a certain height at a distance of no more than X into the setback. I believe it's objective and measurable, and they can see whether or not the end result is in fact conforming. I think that's the important thing here. Is that correct, Maria?
Yes.
And we will have a
Let him figure it
final
out.
survey to reflect that the conditions are met.
I might also note, we don't normally do engineering on the fly here. We're just trying to work out something that's equitable for everyone.
And I appreciate it. I really do.
That's what they say about his work.
He was going to re-engineer your whole.
Looks like you did this on the fly.
For a small fee, I just wanted to mention that.
I wish I'd have had somebody sooner, honestly, because it's,
What would a
And-
meeting be without a dig it, Matt?
I tell you.
I do wish it was over sooner, because at 9% interest rate, that's really not helping me out any to have it sit there. I mean, the AC, the house has been cleaned inside and final probably around Christmas time. So, I mean, it's been sitting there, actually, it was before that is when I got power on. So, I mean, it's clean and ready to pretty much move in, minus one thing I got to do inside, but
Sure, the neighbors are just as anxious to have
I'm
this.
sure they are. And I do apologize for the burden, but it's just, it's the hand that I've been dealt, and I'm trying to make the best of it.
Okay.
Provide an overall length into the setback for the overall retaining wall as a whole? Or I guess we wouldn't have to at that point because it'd be under 3.5.
Yeah, because we're saying we'll allow it taller for
Says
10,
can be
and then the
3.
rest it can be, yep.
And at that 54 inches, I would venture to say that I won't have the much sticking out of the ground at that height. I mean, I can taper it off pretty good to make it, that's the first wall disappear a little bit.
Is there going to be any, assuming that there is a second retaining wall, is there a requirement for variance on height? So I'm going to make the assumption, that the course of action is to put a second retaining wall there. I'd hate to go back and say, hey, there's a height variance that needs to be done. So if we're going to go this far and say, no more than 54 inches in height and not to encroach more than 10 feet in the setback, in the event that a second, retaining wall is required, it will not, put at least a height on that, right? I mean, I don't know, so we don't have to come back and revisit.
Yeah.
It would be the same
we-
height that we're now allowing
Yeah, yeah, maybe 54 inches,
before still.
which
'Cause that-
probably won't need it.
That would be now for the entire
Yeah.
setback.
So-
right? So, I mean, technically, he could go and do something on the other
Well,
side.
and you can safeguard that further as, in place, this is what I recommend. I mean, you're already considering giving a whole foot allowance where every other person absent a variance is subject to meeting a more stringent regulation. So
It's already a 5-foot allowance now.
I would steer clear of giving further allowances, and that this condition would be relative to, based on the evidence submitted and the record for the hearing would be for this wall.
Right, exactly. Right.
Certainly not countering, but are we going to do ourselves a disservice if we don't mention the height on the second wall? Or does that have to be within?
I was going to ask the same question as well. I mean,
I'd be reluctant to go down that.
I would want to achieve is not only something that's doable by you, but it's something that's also enforceable and measurable by staff. And I think that's where some of that's coming from. And we could, I mean, we can measure, Paul wants to provide a measurement, we could add it in.
That would be my recommendation, that we put it in there, and, whatever that number
Are
we're
you
comfortable
thinking-
with, that way we don't come back and have to
Are you
revisit
thinking
the same
something,
thing.
Paul, like should a second retaining wall be necessitated, it would not exceed X?
Yes.
I just don't know that we can do that without asking him to come back.
How would you
because
know?
Right, we don't.
yeah, I mean, right now the finished height is 111, and you add, say, mud joint and 2-inch, so you're looking at 3 inches, so 114 inches minus the 54. That would be my height of my secondary retaining wall, is what it would need to be at. Right. And as long as that's inside the building envelope and not inside the
long as
setback.
it's outside the setback, it doesn't matter.
So as long as it's the 42 inches,
As long as it's inside the building envelope, yeah.
I don't know, without building it, it's gonna be hard to tell what I can do, but it'll be close. I mean, I can assume.
I wouldn't, I would give him the 5 feet inside the building envelope. If he has to come back and it's 5 foot 1 inches, then it's going to be another, visit to this board.
But he doesn't need our blessing inside the building envelope. As long as it's outside the setback, he could build it 10 feet tall.
Within that 5 feet that I've got right now.
He'll need
right?
he'll need a permit to build the wall, but
I mean, I don't think he
Yeah,
would have to come back to us
yeah.
if that was
Okay,
the case.
fair enough.
Okay, so here's what I've got.
so this is still
Still
This draft two.
brainstorming
Draft 2.
All right.
brainstorming here, okay.
Condition that the height of the retaining wall may not exceed 54 inches at a distance encroaching 10 feet into the existing setback at the southwest retaining wall.
Let's say
More than
not to encroach more than 10 feet.
And is that specific on that existing retaining wall, right?
That's right. It is.
Not the secondary.
I agree with that.
Have any more discussion? I think it's been productive. Let's see where we're going from here.
Okay. You ready for a motion?
That would be desired, yep.
I move that the Board of Adjustment approve with conditions a variance request for 185 Cantor Lane and adopt the following findings of fact. Unnecessary hardship would result from the strict application of the ordinance because the house has already been constructed with consideration of the retaining wall. The hardship results from conditions that are peculiar to the property, including the significant elevation change across the property and the proximity of wetland area and stream to the property. The hardship did not result from actions taken by the applicant or the property owner. because of the presence of wetlands and the stream setting the finished floor where it is. And the requested variance is consistent with the spirit, purpose, and intent of the ordinance such that public safety is secured and substantial justice is achieved. The variance provides for an intrusion into the setback that is consistent with maintaining a pleasant appearance within setback areas within the village, with the condition that the height of the retaining wall may not exceed 54 inches at a distance not encroaching more than 10 feet into the existing setback at the southwest retaining wall.
Matt, I'm going to ask you if you would entertain an amendment. And in your first
go ahead.
condition, the question where you had said that the hardship was the house has already been constructed, if we can strike that and instead have the hardship flow from the topography, the slope, the placement of the wetland, the buildability of the lot, those characteristics of the land.
Topography of the lot.
Yep.
I'm agreeable to that.
Thank you.
That no good deed goes unpunished here.
But I tell you,
Do we need that reread, or I think it's fairly well understood? Am I wrong?
I think I understand, yes.
Okay. Now, so a motion has been made by Matt Jones. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Hooper. Is there any further discussion? I'll take a roll call vote on this, starting on my right.
Aye.
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 I also approve. So you have your variance.
Thank y'all so
With
much.
condition-
That-
with
It's time
the
to move
condition.
forward now, so thank you.
You understand the condition,
I do,
correct?
yes, sir.
Okay, it'll be well documented, and you'll get that.
Okay.
Great.
I look forward to it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Robinson, for your testimony. Okay, I believe we are pretty much done with the hearing. So I would entertain a move to adjourn the public hearing and re-enter the regular meeting.
I'll make a motion that we exit the public hearing and re-enter our regular meeting.
Moved by Mr. Hooper. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? So we have re-entered the regular meeting. The only item on the agenda is to specify the next meeting date, which is July 6, 2023, if we have business to conduct. And I'm not sure that will be the case.
I tried to get us coming back, but Paul didn't want to come
Tried
back.
hard.
That's true.
Okay, I will also entertain the all-important motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn the regular meeting.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Jones, I think, and seconded by Mr. Hooper to adjourn the meeting. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Our meeting is adjourned at 6:03 PM. Thank you.